You don't need as much XLM as you may think. That's usually the first thing I remind people when we start talking about long-term crypto investing. And it's not just about XLM. It's about utility-driven assets as a whole. You see, in crypto, most of the attention gets stolen by shiny new tokens that show up out of nowhere, pump like crazy for a week or two, and then collapse back to nothing. And sure, that cycle can be exciting, but if you zoom out, most of those hype-driven projects don't survive. They're like fireworks. Bright, loud, spectacular for a moment, but gone almost as quickly as they appeared. Utility assets? They're different. They're not about the quick pump, the 1000% gains overnight, or the hype cycle. They're about solving actual problems, building infrastructure, and sticking around long enough to benefit from the fact that the world is moving toward digital solutions whether anyone likes it or not. Over a long enough time frame, real utility has nowhere to go but up. The real question isn't whether Stellar or Hedera or XRP or any other network with actual partnerships and integrations will succeed. The real question is, how long can you hold? Because if you give utility assets enough time, they do their thing quietly in the background, and then suddenly you look up 5 years later and realize the game has changed. Now let's talk about why hype doesn't last. Imagine for a second how many new tokens pop up every single day. Thousands. Memecoins, clones of other projects, random experimental stuff that has no community, no unique proposition, and no staying power. 99% of these tokens end up being rug pulls, honeypots, or just ghost projects. Traders get tired. They jump from one pump to the next, but deep down, everyone knows most of them are just playing musical chairs, hoping not to be the last one holding the bag. And here's the thing, hype can give you fast gains if you time it right, but it's like trying to catch lightning in a bottle over and over. The odds aren't in your favor. That's why, when the dust settles, the only projects that really matter are the ones with strong fundamentals, actual partnerships, and an expanding total addressable market. That's where Stellar and XLM come in. Think about it. XLM isn't just some speculative play. It's an infrastructure layer for payments, remittances, and cross-border financial solutions. When you look at the broader crypto landscape, it's easy to get distracted by whatever memecoin is trending on Twitter or whatever influencer is shilling. But zoom out, and you realize that crypto is supposed to be about solving inefficiencies in how money moves. Stellar is literally built for that. It's not trying to be everything to everyone. It's not promising to reinvent finance in some vague, undefined way. It has a very clear focus: making payments faster, cheaper, and more accessible across borders. That clarity of purpose is what separates utility-driven assets from the noise. Now, let's get even more real about this. The majority of traders in the market are losing money. Why? Because they chase hype. They FOMO into projects when they're already up thousands of %. They ignore fundamentals because fundamentals take too long. Fundamentals are boring in the short term. But here's the twist. Fundamentals compound. Partnerships compound. Adoption compounds. Every time Stellar integrates with a payment provider, every time a financial giant like MoneyGram or Visa experiments with stablecoin settlement on the Stellar network, that progress doesn't vanish when the hype cycle cools off. It sticks. It becomes part of the network's DNA. And over years, that steady accumulation of real-world integrations becomes the reason why utility-driven assets outlast the hype. So why does utility win every time? Comes down to survival. In the chaotic world of crypto, hype tokens might explode, but most of them won't survive a bear market. They'll fade into obscurity, liquidity will dry up, and their communities will scatter to the next shiny thing. But assets like XLM survive. They don't just survive, they adapt, grow, and thrive because they're tied to actual use cases that don't disappear when prices dip. And here's the paradox that most traders never learn. The patience to hold through the boring periods is exactly what gets rewarded the most. Picture this. Back in the early days of Bitcoin, people laughed at the idea of holding on to an asset that looked like internet monopoly money. But those who simply held, ignoring the noise, are the ones sitting on life-changing gains today. The same principle applies here. If you believe in the core utility of XLM, if you believe in what Stellar is building, the only real question is whether you can hold long enough to let time do the heavy lifting. And let's be clear, utility doesn't mean instant riches. That's another thing people misunderstand. When you're investing in something like XLM, you're not betting on a lottery ticket. You're betting on a system that has the potential to serve billions of people over the next decade. That kind of adoption doesn't happen overnight. But when it does happen, when the infrastructure is laid, the partnerships are in place, and the user base expands, that's when the compounding effect kicks in. That's when you see the exponential growth. The difference between hype and utility is the difference between sprinting and running a marathon. Sprinting is fast, intense, but unsustainable. Marathons are slower, steady, and built to last. Utility-driven assets are marathon runners. So when people ask me, why XLM? Why not chase the token that's trending on Twitter right now? My answer is simple. Because I don't want to gamble on whether I can get in and out at the perfect time. I'd rather place my chips on something that has staying power, something that's tied to real-world value. Something like Stellar, where the mission is clear and the adoption curve is already unfolding right in front of us. And the beauty of utility is that you don't need as much as you think. This is where a lot of people get it twisted. They see the total addressable market, the TAM, and they start making crazy projections. They think, oh, if Stellar captures 10% of this $27 trillion market, then it's going to instantly become a multi-trillion-dollar asset. That's not realistic. That's not how adoption works. But here's what is realistic. Capturing a tiny slice of that pie. Just 1% of a trillion-dollar market is still billions in value. And Stellar is already positioned with real partners to capture that slice. Utility wins because it survives. It wins because it compounds. It wins because even when the hype fades, the use case remains. And if you can hold long enough to let that play out, you'll see why it doesn't take massive amounts of XLM to potentially change your position in this market. One of the biggest blind spots people have in crypto is that they don't really think in terms of markets. They think in terms of coins, price charts, green candles, and red candles. They'll tell you, oh, this coin is at 2 cents. If it goes to $1, I'll be rich. But that's not how serious investors or institutions think. Real money, the type of money that actually moves markets, asks one question: what's the total addressable market here? In other words, how big is the pie, and how much of it can this network realistically capture? And when we start applying that lens to Stellar, the numbers get mind-blowing really fast. Remittances, the trillion-dollar river of money. Let's start with remittances. Money sent across borders by migrant workers to their families. According to the World Bank, remittance flows to low- and middle-income countries topped $669 billion in 2023 and are projected to keep growing year over year. Think about that for a second. Nearly $700 billion is just people sending money home, often in small amounts like $100 or $200 at a time. Now here's the kicker. The average cost of sending remittances is around 6%. That means for every $100 sent, about $6 evaporates into fees. For someone working long hours abroad, sending home $200 a month, that's a $12 haircut every single time. Over a year, that's $144 lost to middlemen. Now multiply that across billions of transactions, and you're looking at tens of billions of dollars in pure friction. This is exactly the type of inefficiency Stellar was designed to solve. With XLM, you can move money across borders for a fraction of a penny, and it settles in seconds. So if Stellar even captured just 10% of the global remittance market, you're talking about $60+ billion in flow routed through its rails annually. That's already orders of magnitude bigger than the entire market cap of XLM today. The broader payments industry. But remittances are just one piece of the puzzle. The global payments industry, the combined value of all money moving through rails like Visa, MasterCard, SWIFT, Western Union, PayPal, Alipay, you name it, sits north of $2.5 trillion in revenue per year. That's not transaction value. That's just fees and revenues collected by payment companies for providing the rails. Visa alone processed $14.5 trillion in total volume in 2022, while MasterCard handled nearly $8 trillion. And then you've got PayPal at $1.4 trillion, plus giants like Alipay and Tencent dominating China. Now ask yourself, what percentage of that value could be processed more cheaply, more transparently, and more inclusively through open blockchain networks like Stellar? Even if Stellar captured just 1% of that $2.5 trillion revenue pool, you're looking at $25 billion in displaced fees. If you compare that against XLM's current market cap, hovering around a few billion, you start to see the scale of the upside. Stablecoins, CBDCs, and RWAs. Here's where the story gets even bigger. Remittances and payments are low-hanging fruit, but the institutional world is waking up to the power of blockchain rails for something much larger: tokenized money itself. Think about stablecoins. USDC, USDT, and now PayPal's own PYUSD are showing that people want dollars on-chain. Why? Because they settle instantly, can be integrated into apps, and avoid the outdated frictions of traditional banking. The stablecoin market has already ballooned past $150 billion, and some analysts project it could hit $2 to $3 trillion within the next decade. Now, Stellar has positioned itself as a natural home for this wave. Why? Because it was literally designed for fiat tokenization and cross-border use. Projects like Circle and MoneyGram have already tapped Stellar's rails. And when you add in the possibility of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, the TAM expands even further. According to the IMF, over 100 countries are exploring CBDCs, with active pilots in nations like Nigeria, the e-Naira, China, the digital yuan, and the Bahamas, the sand dollar. Most of these projects are experimenting with blockchain or distributed ledger technology. If even a handful of these nations decide that Stellar offers the right blend of openness and compliance, the inflows could be massive. And it doesn't stop there. The tokenization of real-world assets, RWAs, things like bonds, real estate, equities, and commodities has already begun. JP Morgan has tokenized billions of dollars worth of assets through its Onyx platform. BlackRock has rolled out a tokenized money market fund. And according to Boston Consulting Group, tokenized assets could reach a staggering $16 trillion by 2030. Stellar is built for exactly this type of infrastructure. Cheap, fast, compliant settlement for assets that need global liquidity. Inclusion, the hidden multiplier. One thing people often miss when they talk about TAM is the inclusion angle. Billions of people around the world are underbanked or unbanked. According to the World Bank, about 1.4 billion adults globally still don't have access to a bank account. That's not a small niche, that's a massive untapped market. For these people, the barriers aren't just convenience, they're existential. Imagine you're a small shop owner in a rural town, and the nearest bank branch is 50 kilometers away. Or you're a refugee crossing borders with no ID. Traditional finance doesn't serve you. But if you have a cheap smartphone, suddenly you can tap into Stellar's rails and move value globally in seconds. So while Wall Street looks at TAM in terms of trillions of dollars of existing flows, there's this second hidden TAM. The potential to unlock financial participation for billions of people who have been excluded. And history tells us that when you give new populations access to financial tools, economic activity expands dramatically. It's not just about slicing the existing pie differently. It's about making the pie bigger. TAM versus market cap. Why this matters for XLM. Here's the bottom line. When you line up Stellar's design with the actual size of the markets it's targeting, remittances, payments, stablecoins, CBDCs, tokenized assets, and financial inclusion, you're looking at a TAM measured not in billions but in trillions of dollars. Now compare that with the current market cap of XLM, which has hovered between $3 to $5 billion. That's the asymmetry that long-term investors look for. It's not about hoping the coin goes to $1. It's about understanding that if Stellar successfully eats even a tiny slice of these markets, the upside could be exponential. That's why institutions care. They're not buying lottery tickets. They're assessing whether the network can realistically handle real-world volume. And Stellar has been quietly proving that it can. If you've been around crypto for more than 5 minutes, you've probably noticed that every project claims to be the fastest, the cheapest, or the most scalable. It's like walking through a bazaar where every vendor is shouting, "No, buy here. Our blockchain does 1,000,000 TPS and saves the whales while it's at it." The noise can get overwhelming. So, when you're looking at Stellar and trying to figure out where it actually stands in this jungle, the key is to ask, compared to what? Because value in crypto isn't created in a vacuum. It's relative. Stellar doesn't just need to be good. It needs to be better at specific things that actually matter. Let's break this down. Stellar versus Ripple XRP. Let's start with the elephant in the room. Ripple. For years, Stellar and Ripple have been compared like two siblings with slightly different personalities. Not surprising, since Jed McCaleb co-founded Ripple before going on to create Stellar. Ripple's pitch has always been about serving banks and big institutions. It's essentially a wholesale solution. Let us replace SWIFT. Let us give banks better rails. Let us lubricate the plumbing of high-value cross-border transfers. Stellar's pitch, by contrast, has been grassroots from day one. Let's make value move like email. Let's give regular people, fintech startups, and NGOs the tools to plug into global payments. In practice, that means Ripple tends to focus on institution-to-institution transfers, while Stellar focuses more on person-to-person and institution-to-people. So, while Ripple courts HSBC and Santander, Stellar is more likely to partner with MoneyGram to let migrant workers send remittances home instantly. This divergence is important. Both networks are solving cross-border payments, but they're attacking different slices of the TAM. Ripple wants to be the SWIFT replacement. Stellar wants to be the on-off ramp for everyday money movement. That difference explains why Ripple spends time in courtrooms with the SEC, while Stellar is out in the field with the UN distributing aid in Ukraine. Stellar versus Ethereum. Then you have Ethereum, the OG smart contract platform. Ethereum is where DeFi was born, where NFTs went mainstream, and where the culture of crypto lives. But here's the truth. Ethereum was never designed for simple payments. If you've ever tried sending USDT or USDC on Ethereum during peak congestion, you know the pain. Gas fees spiking to $50 or $100 for a $200 transaction isn't just inconvenient. It's a non-starter for remittances and microtransactions. Imagine telling a farmer in Kenya that it costs half his day's wages just to send money to his cousin. That's where Ethereum falls flat for Stellar's use case. Now, Ethereum has scaling solutions like Arbitrum, Optimism, and Polygon. But those are still add-ons to a system not natively built for cheap, fast settlement. Stellar, by design, keeps transaction fees near zero and finalizes in seconds. So while Ethereum will likely remain the playground for complex DeFi and on-chain culture, Stellar carves out the niche of pure payments and fiat-to-crypto on off-ramps. Stellar versus Cardano, Solana, and the Ethereum killers. Let's lump a few of these together. Cardano pitches itself as the academically rigorous, slow and steady blockchain that prioritizes peer-reviewed research. Solana positions itself as the lightning-fast chain for traders and DeFi degenerates. Avalanche and others make similar claims. Here's the difference. All of these chains are trying to be general-purpose smart contract platforms. They want to be the next Ethereum, but faster and cheaper. The problem is that's a crowded field. They're all chasing the same crown. Stellar doesn't compete in that arena. Stellar says, you all can fight over DeFi yields, NFT marketplaces, and gaming. I'll stick to my lane. Moving money across borders, cheap and fast. That's actually an advantage. It avoids the trap of being everything to everyone and instead optimizes ruthlessly for one use case. Think of it like this. Ethereum is the iPhone, Solana is the Android flagship, Cardano is the academic research lab, and Stellar is the Western Union disruptor. Different missions, different target markets. Stellar versus SWIFT and traditional finance. But here's the more interesting comparison. Not Stellar versus crypto, but Stellar versus TradFi. Because at the end of the day, Stellar isn't trying to outcompete Solana or Cardano. Its true competition is SWIFT, Visa, MasterCard, Western Union, and the countless middlemen who take their cuts from every cross-border transaction. Take SWIFT, for example. It connects over 11,000 institutions across more than 200 countries. It's the backbone of international transfers. But it's also notoriously slow and expensive. A SWIFT transfer can take 2 to 5 days and rack up fees along the way, especially with currency conversions. Visa and MasterCard? They process trillions in annual volume, but they also skim off 2 to 3% per transaction. That's invisible for a big purchase, but crippling for microtransactions or low-margin businesses. This is where Stellar shines. Transactions settle in seconds, cost fractions of a cent, and don't require permission from intermediaries. If SWIFT is the horse and buggy, Stellar is the bullet train. And unlike most crypto projects, Stellar isn't hypothetical. It's already processing real remittances through partners like MoneyGram, the moat, compliance, and partnerships. Now, here's where Stellar's competitive positioning really starts to look sharp. A lot of blockchains love to say, "We're decentralized. No one can stop us," which sounds great until regulators knock on the door. Then suddenly you realize decentralization isn't enough. For global payments, compliance matters. Stellar's strategy has been smart. Partner with existing institutions, banks, remittance providers, NGOs. Play nicely with regulators and focus on being the compliant bridge rather than the outlaw alternative. That's why you see Stellar working directly with the UNHCR, MoneyGram, and Circle. It's not trying to blow up the system, it's trying to upgrade it from within. This hybrid approach gives Stellar a moat. While Solana is chasing NFT volumes and Ripple is stuck in legal purgatory, Stellar quietly builds a reputation as the blockchain you can actually use without a regulatory headache. Why this matters for investors. At the end of the day, competitive positioning is what drives adoption. Institutions don't want the shiniest toy. They want the tool that solves their specific problem with the least friction. And when you line it all up, Stellar's differentiation is crystal clear. Cheaper and faster than Ethereum for payments. More retail-focused than Ripple. More specialized than Solana, Cardano, and the general-purpose smart contract platforms. More modern and inclusive than Swift and traditional payment rails. More compliant and partnership-driven than most blockchain networks. That's the formula. It's not about hype, it's about being in the right lane with the right tool at the right time. And if you zoom out and look at the trillion-dollar market Stellar is targeting, you start to realize it doesn't need to beat Ethereum or kill Solana. It just needs to carve out its slice of the payments world. And that slice alone is massive. So here's the bottom line. Stellar is not just another name floating around in the crypto markets. It's not a meme token built on hype, and it's not one of those pump-and-dump projects that vanish the moment the liquidity dries up. Stellar is a utility asset, plain and simple. It's built for payments, for remittances, for real-world money movement, the boring stuff that actually matters once the noise dies down. And if you've been paying attention, you've seen the signals. Partnerships with MoneyGram, PayPal's PYUSD integration, Visa expanding stablecoin settlement on Stellar, tokenized real-world assets flowing in through Arch, WisdomTree, and Franklin Templeton. This isn't vaporware. These are serious players in global finance actively building with Stellar's rails. That tells you two things. The tech works. If companies with trillions under management are willing to touch Stellar, that means the network is reliable enough for real money. The adoption curve is real. Every new integration compounds. More assets mean more users. More users mean more liquidity. More liquidity means deeper trust in the system. But let's not sugarcoat it. This isn't going to be a straight line up. There will be headwinds. Regulation could slam the brakes. Competitors aren't standing still. The market will turn brutal during the next bear cycle. And Stellar still needs to solve its branding and adoption hurdles. That's where conviction comes in. The winners in crypto are rarely the ones who threw the biggest bag at the latest meme coin. The winners are usually the ones who understood utility, planted their flag early, and had the patience to let time do its work. We saw it with Bitcoin. We saw it with Ethereum. We saw it with XRP. And yes, we may very well see it again with Stellar. So here's my call to you. Don't just scroll past Stellar. Don't dismiss it because it's not screaming for attention with flashy marketing campaigns. Take the time to understand what's being built here. Dig into the partnerships. Watch how remittances, stablecoins, and tokenized assets are shifting. Pay attention to how Stellar keeps quietly inserting itself into the financial plumbing of the future. Because here's the truth. It doesn't take a massive position to change your outcome. Even a small stack, held patiently, can compound into something meaningful when the tides of adoption turn. It only takes a slice of $1 trillion market to move the needle in ways most people can't even imagine. So if you're serious about long-term conviction plays in crypto, don't ignore Stellar. Add it to your watch list. Do your own research. If it makes sense for your portfolio, accumulate slowly, and then do the hardest but most rewarding thing in this entire space. Hold. Because utility beats hype. Conviction beats timing, and patience beats everything. This is the game. The only question left is, are you willing to play it?